Bueno, pues hoy nos da mucho gusto invitar al profesor Ted Hamann de la Universidad de Nebraska-Lincoln a que nos platique un poquito sobre sus intereses académicos, sus investigaciones. Él ha trabajado mucho con la UNAM, en particular con el Instituto de Investigaciones Antropológicas. Ahorita tenemos un seminario de niñez y adolescencia migrante, entonces yo creo que va a ser súper interesante lo que nos va a platicar Ted. El español de TED es perfecto, pero para cuestiones del curso, pues la charla va a ser en inglés, pero siéntanse libre de si necesitan alguna pregunta que no la pueden hacer en inglés, la pueden hacer en español y TED también les va a enseñar cómo está su Spanglish, ¿no? Entonces, pues nos da mucho gusto, Ted. Muchísimas gracias por aceptar la invitación. Y bueno, la clase es tuya y que la disfruten mucho, chicos.
Ok. Pues buenos días a todos. No sé si hay algunos que están conectando de una zona de tiempo donde está ya la tarde, pues entonces buenas tardes para ellos. Voy a convertir a inglés en un momento, pero estoy hablando español ahora mismo para que ustedes puedan oír. Es muy probable que hablo inglés mejor que español. Ustedes pueden oír el acento. Pero puedo comunicar en español y nuestra conversación puede usar todos los recursos lingüísticos que traemos a esta reunión. Entonces, si hay un punto que no es muy claro que digo en inglés, puedes preguntar en español o puedes pedir una clarificación y puedo tratar de ofrecerlo, ¿ok? So I am going to switch to English now. My understanding is that you all want to practice English. And I suspect, I anticipate that you are at different levels in terms of your comfort with English. As you may well be aware in your own study of language, sometimes people talk about a reading vocabulary, a listening vocabulary, a writing vocabulary, and a speaking vocabulary. And the biggest vocabulary most people have is what's called a reading vocabulary. And that's because as you're reading along in a text, you can go as fast or as slowly as you want. And if you encounter a word or a passage that you don't understand, you have several opportunities. You can reread it. You can use a dictionary to get a translation of a particular word. You can go back to earlier parts of the text to sort of try to clarify the context. That's a little bit of a bigger vocabulary than writing, where you have to generate the words. So there may be words that you're familiar with when you encounter them in context as a reader, but they're not words that you know so well that you are likely to create them yourself as a writer, correct? Speaking and listening is different from reading and writing because it happens in real time. We do have the chance to say what, and the speaker will go back and try to answer. Perhaps if we say what 2 times or 3 times, the speaker will try different words, will try different strategies to sort of share a point that they're trying to make. But in speaking and listening, we often become quite self-conscious. If we're not following a point, after a while, we stop asking. So we don't understand it, but we don't want to embarrass ourselves. So we ask the person, in a sense, to move on. I mention all of that because I have a PowerPoint that will anchor sort of a conversation. But this isn't described as a presentation exactly. This is supposed to be a conversation back and forth. It's supposed to be a chance for you to practice your English. What does that mean? Practice your English as speakers. Practice your English as listeners, hearing me, hearing each other. But it's also the case that if I use the PowerPoint, you then see some written English, and that gives you a scaffold. It gives you extra support. El inglés que está escrito va a ayudar a ustedes a saber más al punto en que estoy tratando de enfocar, for example, okay? So I'm going to momentarily share my screen and have the PowerPoint as an anchor. But one of the things I want all of you to know, for this to be worth your while, for this conversation, this encounter to be helpful, it's absolutely your prerogative. You have the right to, use the a thumbs up or a applause, or you can raise your hand literally physically, or if you have that as one of your emojis, with a question, and we can certainly pause and talk back and forth, because that practice will be useful, right? Okay, ¿todos entienden lo que están, o más o menos entienden lo que estoy diciendo? Okay. I am going to start to share my screen. So the name of the topic that I want to talk about today is Transnationally Mobile Students in Schools Challenges in Meeting Their Needs. And I will explain a little bit more about that topic. It's something that I have studied for almost 30 years. I'll talk a little bit more about my own biography, so you have a better sense of who I am. But I will point out on the bottom several things. One, as you know, this activity is organized by UNAM-Boston. As a point of curiosity, and write in the chat if this describes you, is anybody here currently in Boston, or even in Massachusetts, or in New England, or, yay, somebody is, Evan is. Okay, welcome, Evan. Anybody else? Okay, so my guess is, we're living in the 21st century. We're living in a strange technological revolution with Zoom. So everybody is joining in from different parts of the world. As a point of interest, perhaps, to a handful of you, I actually grew up in Boston. I'm originally from the suburb of Boston called Belmont. I moved away in 1988. But nonetheless, my oldest memories are from Boston. So that part of UNAM having a connection to the University of Massachusetts, Boston, UNAM having a connection to Harvard University and Boston University and other institutions of higher education in the Boston area. That's a very familiar context to me. I also want to point out down here at the bottom of my slide, it says Fulbright Garcia Robles and then UPN Tijuana. That references the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, Unidad 22, that's in Tijuana. I don't know how much familiarity any of you have with the UPN system, but you may know that Mexico has two structures for preparing teachers for Mexican schools. One are what are called the escuelas normales, the normal schools. Teachers get prepared in that environment and then licensed and become teachers, particularly in educación básica, which means kinder, which is for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. Primaria, or elementary school, which is for 6 to 11. And then secundaria, which is the US equivalent of middle school. It's grades 7 to 9, 13 to 15-year-olds or so. At any rate, I had a Fulbright scholarship, una beca de Fulbright Garcia Robles, and lived in Tijuana for the last half of the 2019 year. And I don't know if any of you, again, by chat, are any of you familiar with Baja California, or any of you connecting now from Tijuana or anywhere in Northwest Mexico? I'm not seeing any new chat comments. Oh, good. So somebody, I don't know who that is that's adding that in. But so a handful of you are familiar with Tijuana. I will further let you know that I have lived, and I'm using the term lived to refer to estancias de más de 6 semanas. So time periods of more than 6 weeks. I have lived in Michoacán, Mexico, 2 times, on an island in Lake Pátzcuaro in Mexico, a community called Urandén, which is a indigenous community, Purépecha. I have lived in Uruapan, also in Michoacan. I have lived in Guanajuato, the capital, Guanajuato. I have lived and actually brought my family to Monterrey, lived for 6 months. And so I sometimes joke that yo puedo fingir que soy un regio. I sometimes pretend I'm a regio, somebody from Nuevo León. Although I'm not, but I do like grilled goat leg. At any rate, and then I have this recent experience in Tijuana. I have also traveled through many parts of Mexico without living in them. So I've spent time in the Yucatan, for example, as a tourist in Tulum, but also attending academic conferences in Mérida. And I have a closet affinity for archaeology. So I've gone and visited ruins outside of Mexico City, like Teotihuacan, but Ekbalem and Coba and various things in the Yucatan. Anyway, you don't need a whole travel log from me, but I want you to know that part of the context I'm bringing to this conversation is a familiarity with different parts of Mexico. So one of the things I actually want to pause now, and this is going to be a moment where you talk, and I'm gonna actually stop the screen share and then I'll restart it so I can see all of you easily on the Zoom. But I'm curious to have you, and we'll use up all our time if this is long, but if you would do a 15-second introduction of yourself, you know, my name is, and I'm connecting from, just sort of like where you currently are and what your name is. I'll get a little bit of a sense of who you are, and I'll also be in a position to at least quickly judge your English. 15 seconds of English is obviously very little, but I can get a sense of what you know and are willing to do. So I'm gonna stop the share right now. I see everybody. And I'm going to, there is an old American television show called The Brady Bunch. And in the Brady Bunch, in the introduction, everybody was in a square, just like in Zoom. So I sometimes will say, in the Brady Bunch of Zoom. So as I look across, my top row reads Larry Murillo, then Stephanie, then Evan. And then after that is Galem, Nubia, Frida, and Yvette. So I'll call on you, if you will, based on what I know your names on Zoom, and then ask you just quickly to unmute, introduce yourself, say where you're connecting from, and then we'll go on to the next one. But Larry, you are first.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, so my name is Larry. I studied law. I am from Mexico City.
Okay. Stephanie?
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm studying law, and I'm from Guadalajara, Jalisco.
Okay, un tapatío.
Yes.
Evan?
Hi, my name's Evan, and I'm connecting from Boston, Massachusetts, and I teach the Invierno Puma class.
Okay, excellent. And then is it Galehem? I don't know how to, I can read it out loud, but I don't know the pronunciation.
Yes, it's Galehem.
Galehem, okay.
I'm Gabby. I'm
Okay.
studying veterinary medicine, and I'm from Monterrey.
Okay, un regio, or regia. Okay. Yay! Excellent. Nubia?
Well, my name is Nubia. I studied law at UNAM-Boston school, and I'm from the state of Mexico.
Okay. Alrededor de la capital. Okay. Frida?
Yes, hi, my name is Frida. I'm studying psychology and I'm from Mexico City.
Okay, thank you. Yvette? And then Alberto, and then whoever is dialing in at 10000000001. You'll come after Alberto. So, but Yvette?
Hello, my name is Yvette. I'm studying computer science and I'm from Mexico City.
Okay. Alberto?
Hi, my name is Alberto.
Hi.
I'm from the state of Mexico, and I studied chemistry.
Okay. And then 100000001.
Yes. My name is Denis. I'm from Pachuca Hidalgo.
Okay, Pachuca Hidalgo. Okay.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes.
That's perfect.
I studied biology. Yes.
Okay, great. Then I've got Esther, Lisette, and Diana next. Esther?
Hi, my name is Esther. I am from state of Mexico, and I am a PhD student at UNAM.
PhD in what?
In Facultad de Ciencias Políticas y Sociales.
Okay.
Yes, international relations, and well, my research is about migration and
Okay.
global cities.
Excellent. We will talk exactly about migration in just a moment.
Yes, okay.
Lisette?
Hi, my name is Lisette. I study communication science in la Facultad de Ciencias Políticas y Sociales, and I am from Mexico City.
Okay, thank you and welcome. Diana, and then Ana and Daniel Antonio after that. Diana?
Yes, hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm occupational therapist. I'm studying Hispanic literature at UNAM, and I'm from Mexico City.
Okay. So the humanities are represented. Diana?
Yes. Hi, I'm Diana. I study petroleum engineering, and I'm from of Mexico City.
Okay, welcome. Daniel Antonio, and then after Daniel, Paulina?
Hi, my name is Daniel.
Okay.
I'm from Toluca, state of Mexico, and I study in the Department of Music at UNAM.
Okay. Does the Nevado de Toluca have snow on it right now?
Now I'm in Mexico City.
Oh, okay.
But,
So you don't have a sight line to it. Okay. Paulina?
Hi, I'm Paulina. I'm from Mexico City, and I'm studying design and visual communication.
Okay, welcome. Then I'm going to do Ushmal, Pedro, and Brenda. Ushmal?
Hi, I'm Ushmal. I'm from state of Mexico, and I'm still studying high school.
Okay, welcome. Pedro?
Hi, I'm Pedro, and I study design and visual communication. I'm from Mexico City.
Okay. Brenda, and then Carmina?
Hi, Ted. I'm Brenda Rivera. I'm from state of Mexico. I'm studying commercial relationships on IPN.
Okay. What is that? The Instituto Politécnica Nacional? The IPN? Okay.
Yes.
Great.
City of Mexico.
Okay. Carmina, and then after Carmina, I don't know who else. Oh, I've got, well, there's several more. I've got a whole nother screen. Uh-oh. Okay. Anyway, Carmina?
Yes. Hi, I am Carmina. I'm from Mexico City, and I'm studying high school.
Okay. Then I've got Frank, and then Denise.
Hi, hello, I'm Frank, and I'm from Mexico City, and I'm studying.
Okay. Denise?
Yeah, hi, my name is Denise, and I'm doing my master's in biological science, and I am from the state of Mexico.
Okay. So we very much are, the center of Mexico is well represented here. Priscilla, Jessica, and then Sarai. Priscilla?
Yes, sorry. Hi, my name is Priscilla. I'm from Querétaro. I am a communications and journalism student.
Okay.
And that's it.
Querétaro?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Is it Jessica or Jessica?
Yes, I'm Jessica. I'm from Mexico City, and I am studying psychology.
Okay. And then Sarai?
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Sarai, and I study psychology, and I'm from Mexico City.
Okay. Is that the ruins of Teotihuacan that you have behind you?
Yes.
Okay, good. I told you I secretly love archaeology. So that's fascinating. Then I've got, I think the remainder to go are Carmen, Lourdes, Hector, and Marce. And then I think everybody has introduced themselves.
Okay, hello everybody. I am Carmen Itzel. I am studying biology at FES Zaragoza de la UNAM.
Okay.
And I am connecting from the south of the city, from Coyoacán.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where Diego and Frida used to live. Lourdes, then Hector, then Marce, and then I will talk some more. Lourdes?
Good morning. I'm Lourdes. I'm from Chilpancingo, Guerrero, and
Okay.
I study business administration.
Welcome. Hector? Hector Zavala? He may not have his.
I think he has like some problems with his internet.
That's my guess. I'm guessing. And then Marce.
But we all know Hector.
Okay. Marce, can you hear me? Well, I will move on. I'll switch back to, but I have a decent sense of, I don't know if you know the word heterogeneous, heterogeneo, but you were a very heterogeneous group. And I will try to blend the sort of teaching or practice with English with the content that you find, concurrently find interesting. So it's, as I indicated, anytime you have a question as I go through this presentation, do feel free to get my attention. And I will try to respond to a question. So one of the things when we get to maybe slide 7 or 8, there is a kind of complicated explanation of some descriptive statistics. And I thought as you were practicing your English, the chance to have to try to make sense of somebody describing numbers would be useful. So let me advance this. So who am I to tell this story? If we go back, remember that the name of, oops, we're going in the wrong direction. Fascinating, you're getting a sneak preview. Okay, so the name of this talk is Transnationally Mobile Students in Schools, Challenges, and Meeting Their Needs. So who am I to tell this story? I will let you know that since the early 1990s, I graduated from university. I earned my what we would call in the US a bachelor's degree, mi licenciado, in 1991. And at that time, I had a double major concentration area of study. One was Latin American studies, the other was education. And I actually spent a fair amount of time studying the history of education in Mexico, particularly the development of Mexico's rural school system in the 1920s as a sort of area of focus when I was earning my licenciatura. At any rate, ever since then, I have continued to study and think about Mexico. And for much of the 1990s and early 2000s, there continued to be a substantial migration that included children from Mexico to the United States. And so a number of US states, a number of US school districts, a number of US schools saw their population of children who previously had gone to school in Mexico growing. And that had a lot to do with the economic changes going on in Mexico as Mexico reacted to NAFTA. That had to do with more people entering the job market than there were spaces for. And so there was a substantial migration story out of Mexico to the US. Somewhat more recently, but always, or at least for the 30 years that I've been involved with this, even though there has been migration from Mexico to the US, there has also been migration from the US to Mexico. Meaning a child born in Louisiana or in California, perhaps starting school in either of those places, moving, and another word we could use, emigrating from the United States, immigrating to Mexico, accompanied by their parents who quite likely were returning to Mexico. So we have these different words: to emigrate, to immigrate, to return. At any rate, as we'll talk about, for about the last 20 years, particularly in close collaboration with a Mexican sociologist, Victor Zúñiga, who is at Tec de Monterrey, and then with a professor at the Escuela Normal Miguel F. Martinez that's in Monterrey, Mexico, somebody named Dr. Juan Sanchez Garcia. The three of us, we sometimes call ourselves Los Tres Mosqueteros, the three of us have engaged in a kind of systematic study and mapping in Mexico of children with prior experience in the US. And it's a emergent bilingual, bicultural, binational population. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And I'm going to propose to you that the schooling of those children looks different and by intent needs to look different as we go forward. And then part of this talk I previously gave at San Diego State University, 8 miles from the border to Tijuana, right? And so I'm going to focus a little bit, particularly on statistics from Baja California, from the border, partly because Baja California is the most impacted state in terms of the highest proportion and highest number of children in Baja California schools with prior experience in the United States. So there are children in Mexico City who used to be in the United States. There are children in Guerrero who used to be in the United States. There are children in Zacatecas who used to be in the United States. But the biggest concentrations is in Baja California. The second highest concentration is in Chihuahua, probably primarily Ciudad Juarez, but also Chihuahua. And then the third highest concentration actually is in Jalisco, if you're curious. And that probably has something to do with the fact that Jalisco is Mexico's third largest state. So it has a high migration, a high international migration rate, and there's just a lot of people. So even a rate lower than Baja California will make still a lot of people because it's just so populous. If you're curious, here are a number of citations. I've been studying this idea that there are students going to school in Mexico who used to be in school in the United States, at least since 2001. And here's the name of a paper called Theorizing the Sojourner Student. And it was an academic attempt to describe a profile of a student. And then with a sketch, bosquejo, with a sketch of appropriate school responsiveness, I started to describe what I thought schools should do, because this was a different category, a different experience in terms of student background than Mexican schools have encountered before. It's different than what Mexican schools are designed for. There's a number of other publications here. I want to very briefly draw your attention to this third one and part of the title, Schooling and the Everyday Ruptures. If you know the word rupture, it's almost a violent word. A rupture means a break. It means a fragmentation, some kind of discontinuity. And I would propose it feels like a rupture if for 7 years you have gone to school in Houston, Texas, and every morning the teacher has said, good morning. And every morning there has been a ceremony, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And then you were in school in Nuevo Laredo, and the flag ceremony happens only once a week, and it's to a different flag, it's to the Mexican flag, and it's in Spanish. And you may know Spanish because your parents spoke it in your house as you were growing up in Houston, but this is the first time school has been in Spanish. And so even though it's familiar, it's never been an academic language. And I'm proposing it's a rupture. There's an awful lot more that I could say there, but to keep moving on. Here are some more recent publications. Our collaboration for 20 years now and counting, I think we've published maybe 16 or 17 different papers. If you're curious, we have a book accessible in Spanish from 2008, published by the Secretaría de Educación Pública, that's called Alumnos Transnacionales, Escuelas Mexicanas Frente a la Globalización. I can connect you with a link to that if you want later. and you can see there are some other publications like this one that are in Spanish. If you're curious about the topic and want to run with your strongest language to find more, there are materials in Spanish and materials in English. Or you can look for materials in both and practice your English by looking at the English versions of content that you've also explored in Spanish. I do want to draw your attention to this one study here. Where should my child go to school? Our 2 decades of research, our 20 years of studying has mostly focused on children. And we have found these children by visiting schools and with the permission of the Secretaría de Educación Estatal in various states and so forth. But occasionally we will run into parents as part of this research. And one of the most interesting questions to me is when a parent says, where should my child go to school? You know, they know that I'm from the US. The parents know that their children have been in school in both the US and Mexico. These encounters with the parents that I'm describing happened in Mexico. So Mexican parents often worrying, you know, now we are in Mexico, now we are back in Mexico. Is this the best place for my child to go to school? And I want to propose to you, I don't offer a single answer back. The sort of classic American response is, it depends, quizás, maybe. And it depends on the particular circumstances of a household and a family and their different opportunities. But it's a very poignant, a very powerful question. Where should my child go to school? Because you sort of have a feeling as a parent that the future of my child is in the balance. What's in my child's best interest? Okay, so I'm going to continue forward here a little bit. Sorry. So, whoops, I skipped one. So who are the students? These are statistics from Baja California. In all of Mexico at this point, Educación Básica is obligatory. How do you say that in Spanish? Obligatorio, I think. Anyway, it's almost the same word. And in 2018-19, so the school year 2 years ago, Baja California counted over 50,000, it was 51,000 children in Baja California schools who had been born in the United States. And some of you may know this, if you're born in the United States, you qualify for US citizenship because of where you were born. Given that these children were in Mexican schools, in practically all cases, I didn't interview the parents, but in practically all cases, born to Mexican parents, these children were also Mexican citizens because of who their parents were. So I'm describing to you 51,000 children who likely were dual citizens. They have rights as adults in both the United States and in Mexico, rights to vote, responsibilities to pay taxes, and so forth. So this is a child age, they're still children in this data point. They're children who will become binational, bicultural adults. Okay. If you're curious, one of the things that we were talking about when we talked specifically about Baja California, is it's a interesting state because there's only 5 municipios. You know, in Jalisco, I don't know how many municipios there are, 250 maybe. So Baja California has these very, very large, the US equivalent would be counties. And by land, almost 70% of the territory of Baja California is in Ensenada. And then there's also a city, Ensenada. And so one of the things that we did is we were just trying to make sense of, well, who is the population in Baja California that was born in the US? Where are they? And we found that in Ensenada, 4.2%, or about 1 out of every 24 children, was born in the US. In Mexicali, which is a different municipio, 6.4% of the children were born in the US, or about 1 out of every 18. In Playas de Rosarito, which is just south of Tijuana, it's a very small municipio, almost 9%, or almost 1 out of 11 students was born in the United States. in Tecate, which is in the Cordillera. It's in the mountains as you go up and over from Tijuana to Mexicali along the US border. Tecate, slightly smaller portion than Playas de Rosarito. About 1 out of every 12 children was born in the US. And in Tijuana, it's more than 1 out of every 11. And there's other data here that we can talk about, but I just wanted to give you some idea of who we're talking about. So when I use the term transnational student, there's actually 4 subcategories that together add up to who I'm talking about. One category are children born in the US, but who leave the US as infants or as toddlers, as young children, and come to Mexico. So even though they're born in the US and have citizenship rights related to birthplace, their life experience is primarily in Mexico. So they're transnational because of rights. They're not so much transnational in terms of lived experience. There is a second category, also born in the US, but who spend a fair amount of time in the US before they come to, in this case, Mexico, right? So their memories are a combination of California and Baja California, or Arizona and Sonora, or New York and Puebla. And the way they make sense of the world is informed by more than one place, more than one country. There is also a population in Mexico schools that was born in Mexico, left Mexico, traveled with their family, most likely, to the US, spent some time in the US, and is now back in Mexico. Those children may have had a long experience in the United States, but they don't necessarily have citizenship rights in the US. So some of these children may speak English as well as Spanish, even English better than Spanish, because most of their school has been in the United States. But the prospect of being able to work in the US as adults, maybe, maybe not, but they likely don't have residency status to legally qualify for work. So their future in the United States is different than somebody who was US born. Doesn't make it automatic that they can't join, but that's a possibility. And then there's also a population in Mexico of children born somewhere else. As you might be familiar with the caravanas, there are populations from Guatemala, from El Salvador, from Honduras that now live in Mexico. In Tijuana, there was a population from Haiti. Because of the maquiladora industry along the US border, and a number of the companies that participate are Chinese companies and Japanese companies. You have children who were born in China and live in Mexico and go to school in Mexico. And they are also transnational, but not transnational US-Mexico. Anyway, this is a very complicated map. I don't need to explain it to you at great length, but what I want to just clarify with you is that I have been part of a long study in 809 schools that was in Nuevo León, Zacatecas, Puebla, Jalisco, and Morelos. These are the number of schools in each state that we visited. We engaged in surveys, encuestas. 14,000 children in Nuevo León, 11,000 in Zacatecas, almost 19,000 in Puebla, and so forth. You can see the numbers. And we found, in the case, for example, of Nuevo León, we found 178 children who'd previously gone to school in the US. We found 68 who had never gone to school in the US, but had been born there. Oh wait, so they're children born in, with school in the US, but born in Mexico. School in the US, born in the US, born in the US, but no school in the US, right? So those are the 3 populations that together add up to transnational students in these states. And the reason that matters is in Baja California and in every state in Mexico, the government does not count, have you gone to school in the United States? What they count is, where were you born? So when a child enrolls in school in Mexico, one piece of information that is shared with the school is birthplace. So Baja California and Chihuahua and Sinaloa, et cetera, know how many US born children they have. They don't know how many Mexico born children they have who may have gone to the US and come back, okay? But our survey was different. This isn't government data. This was us going and visiting the schools and talking with children. So in our survey, we found out that a child said, I'm born in Mexico, but I went to the US and now I'm here in Mexico again. So we were able to create a ratio, a percentage of what portion of the total transnational population came from Mexico, went to the US and came back. In the case of Nuevo León, 53% of the transnational kids we met were born in Mexico. Only 20% were born in the US and had gone to school there, and then 27%. If you add these two numbers together, 47% of the transnational students in Nuevo León when we were there and studying them had been born in the US, because that's 20 plus 27. 53% had been born in Mexico. Here in Jalisco, you can see that it's higher. 31 plus 26 equals 57. 57% of the children had been born in the US, who we found, all of these children we found in Jalisco. And 44% had been found in, had been from Mexico, go to US and come back. Anyway, that matters because when we used the information from Baja California, we weren't surveying children there. We had the Secretaría de Educación Estatal statistics. When they told us how many kids they had who were born in the US, we used this ratio to forecast, to make an estimate of how many children in Baja California might have been born in Mexico, gone to the US and come back, and were an invisible population to teachers there, but may well nonetheless have had important US school experience. So here is the math, if you're curious. Who are the students? And I, just so you know, there's only 4 more slides to go and then we can stop looking at the slides. But one of the things that we were able to do is figure out, okay, 51,076 children born in the US, now in schools in Baja California, 1,143 additional students who were born someplace else. So almost all of the students born in el extranjero, born outside of Mexico, were from the US. 51,000 were born in the US. Only 1,000 more were born someplace else. And this is a blend of Venezuela, Colombia, Guatemala, Nicaragua, China. The second most common state or country for students in Baja California was, I'm doing this by memory, was Guatemala. Then third most common was Venezuela. And Venezuela, as you may know, is in a severe financial crisis. So people are migrating out of, there's several million people who've left Venezuela. A few of them have come to Mexico. Anyway, so then a different thing is to guess, let's see, to be able to come up with an estimate of how many of the children in Baja California schools were born in Mexico, but had US school experience. And there's a kind of complicated math formula as to why we are giving 2 numbers. Our sample from the other states didn't include kinder, and yet our numbers from Baja California did. So we counted kinder in one way, we skipped it the other, and this is what we came out with. But the important number for our purposes is it seems safe to say there's at least 30,000 kids in Baja California who were born in Mexico, have spent substantial time in the US, and now are back in Mexico. It's useful to understand them also as transnational students, alumnos migrantes. So if you add 51,000 US born, 30,000 from Mexico but have traveled away and come back, you get almost 83,000 children in Baja California who are transnational. That's in a state whose total Educación Básica population is just 785,000. So that sets up a dilemma of, wow, there are schools where a quarter, even 40% of the children are transnational. And Mexican schools were never designed around the idea of children with significant school experience somewhere else. So I want to suggest to you, there's just 3 slides to go. Why does the schooling of transnational students need to be different? And I want to suggest to you 3 frames to think about that. One is just the transition from school someplace else to Mexico, the welcome. Then there is a more enduring how schooling gets affected, not just at the moment of the student's arrival in Mexico, but longer term than that. And then a point of school is to prepare people for adulthood. And I'm suggesting to you the adulthoods of these transnational children may be different than their mononational, their one country peers, okay? Let me give you a quick example. In the United States and in Mexico, children sometimes need to go to the bathroom. That's part of being human. It may seem silly to bring that up, but we literally need to go to the bathroom several times a day. If you are a student in the United States, your school will have a protocol. You know, if you need to go to the bathroom, does your teacher say, okay, you can just go down the hall and go to the bathroom? Or is there a pass, a piece of paper? So a student in the hall is carrying this piece of paper as they go down the hall to find the bathroom. Are you only allowed to use the bathroom in transition periods as you go from one class to another? And is there time allowing for that, or can you go anytime you want? When a child is now in a new environment in Mexico, are the rules about going to the bathroom the same? And as you might imagine, a child who doesn't speak Spanish very well, is 8 or 9 years old, desperately needs to go to the bathroom and doesn't know how to ask if it's allowed or where it is, it's very easy to imagine that becoming an emergency for the child. Now let's say, and the phrase we use if somebody goes to the bathroom without getting to a bathroom, if they have an accident, that's embarrassing. It's very, very embarrassing. If you are embarrassed, your first experience of school in Mexico is embarrassing, and that shapes the way you make sense of that school opportunity going forward. It's quite possible other children will tease you remembering what happened that time you came and didn't know what to do and had an accident, right? So in one sense, talking this long about needing to go to the bathroom seems very strange. At another level, I'm bringing it up as something that all of us can relate to, how desperate and harrowing and difficult it must feel if you need to go to the bathroom and don't know. It's a very easy problem for a school to solve if it occurs to people in the school, if it occurs to teachers to tell the children or explain what are the rules. But if you don't have somebody who does that, if you don't have somebody who can communicate with the child who perhaps only speaks English, then an emergency can result, okay? I remember my children, I made an allusion earlier to the fact that I had lived in Monterrey. When my children went to school in Monterrey, like at schools all over Mexico, once a week there was the flag celebration. And I'm going to do this as a model, but I remember my daughter, who was then in el segundo año de secundaria, she was what I would say in 7th grade. So, you know, in Mexico, you're supposed to, it's a very stiff salute, right? My daughter didn't know that, so she was always, right? And it set up the question, was she being unpatriotic? Was she making fun of the Mexican flag? Not intentionally, but what did the people looking at her like this think? That also sets up a question. Should a child from the United States, like my daughter, should they be pledging their loyalty to the flag of Mexico? My daughter loves Mexico, has lived in Mexico multiple times, finds it very interesting, but she would not say Mexico is her home country. Mexico is an interesting place to visit. So what should happen when there is, if she's going to school in Mexico, should she pledge allegiance or not, right? And that's again related to the ritual. How do we do this? How is it supposed to happen? A different challenge and I'll set this up as a longer term. I know in Nuevo León, for example, and I suspect this is true in multiple other parts of Mexico, but Nuevo León takes great pride in the fact that amongst its education goals, and in comparison to other states in Mexico, it has more English language support, partly because of its proximity to Texas, the proximity to the US, but it emphasizes how Monterrey will continue to be one of the economic success stories of Mexico because its workforce is bilingual. It speaks English well as Spanish. Monterrey, the metropolitan area, also likes to argue Monterrey is the concentration of technological prowess, familiarity with computers and the internet and data consumption and data analysis, right? You know, this high-tech Mexico. And so the schools in Monterrey, the schools in Nuevo León say, well, we teach English, we teach technology, and ironically, in Nuevo León, like every other state in Mexico, you have children who have gone to school in the United States, have learned some English, or maybe a lot of English in the United States, may have had what's sometimes called a one-to-one initiative. So an individual child may have had a computer that they could carry with them from classroom to classroom that they could use as a tool of learning. So this child who is now in Mexico may have a lot of experience with English, may have a lot of experience with computers, but there is no easy mechanism in the schools in Mexico to account for the fact that the child is already highly proficient in English, that the child already has a lot of experience with computers. So the Mexican government says, these are skills we want, but the Mexican schools aren't easily positioned to change for a child who already has these skills. One of the things in our studies that we have sometimes found, we will sometimes in Mexico have teachers of English who know that some of the children in their class speak English so well, they informally convert that student into an assistant. So let's say you have secundaria, segundo año de secundaria, you're studying English, and there's 35 children in the class, there's one teacher and two assistants, a brother and sister twins who used to live in Fresno, California. And the teacher is thinking, I need to include these children some way. Their English is so good, it doesn't make sense to treat them like the other kids who are just learning the language for the first time. But that kind of differentiation, I am going to treat some students in my classroom differently than the other students, is uncommon. That's not what Mexican teachers are trained to do. It's not, for that matter, what US teachers are trained to do. But you can imagine how bored a child could become if all of the lessons are things they already know. You can imagine how challenged a teacher might feel if there is a student who knows English better than the teacher does. And so there's a very interesting dynamic set up here. And all I want to do is suggest it's worth our thinking about it. Finally, different futures, if, as I've described, if some children have US citizenship and Mexican citizenship, when they become adults, they may well, depending on economic opportunity, depending on interest, they may well continue to have a binational life. They may spend age 22 to 32 in Las Vegas, Nevada, because that's an exciting place to be a young adult, right? To start a career. And then they may decide that they want to raise their children near the children's grandparents. And so they move back to Acapulco, Guerrero. Wait, Acapulco is not in Guerrero. No, it is, right? Yeah, Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco. Acapulco is Guerrero. Okay. Anyway, so they move back so that the children can grow up near their grandparents. But the opportunities in Acapulco are less promising than they thought. So they decide to move back to Las Vegas, right? I mean, all of these kinds of things are possible. And that means that that adult will be negotiating a life that uses English and a life that uses Spanish. They need both. They need to be familiar with US habits and customs and laws and Mexican habits and customs and laws. And so if we come back to the idea that school is supposed to prepare you for adulthood, the adulthood of these children will look different than some of the other children they're going to school with. And it makes sense for school to sort of recognize that. Anyway, so then we get into Mexican teacher formation, needs to be different. And then we finally, we get into some last comments here that relate specifically to Baja California and specifically to partners. So one of the things, and I'll stop sharing the screen at this point. One of the things that we have learned is that in the United States, teacher preparation happens in comprehensive universities. So for example, San Diego State University offers courses in political science and philosophy and biology and chemical engineering, and it prepares future teachers. In Mexico, the institutions that prepare teachers only prepare teachers. So if you want to study veterinary medicine, you go to the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California. You don't go to the Escuela Normal de la Frontera, right? Because veterinary medicine is not taught at the Escuela Normal de la Frontera, or Fronteriza. At any rate, so the point I want to set up is when US institutions of higher education, US universities, want to collaborate with Mexican universities, and in particular when they want to collaborate related to teachers and teaching, you are matching unlike institutions. I would propose to you that in very important ways, Harvard University and UNAM are very similar, right? Harvard University has a law school, it has a business school, it has arts and sciences, so does UNAM. I would argue to you that Harvard University is not very much like the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, because Harvard is comprehensive and the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional is worried about preparing teachers. So when we have these partnerships that cross borders, you are matching institutions that are not much like each other. That sets up and we can get into other complicated terms. So let me, north to south hegemony, that's a complicated idea. Let me welcome any questions at this point. Let's use our remaining time to just talk back and forth. I've talked at you for a very long time now. I hope you've been able to understand and make sense of what I've been saying. But let me see if you have any questions, anything you want to talk about more. English, Spanish, some mixture thereof. I'm ready to try to be helpful to you. Are you familiar? Oh, go ahead.
Carmen?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think that the talk was very interesting and very clear for me. And I want to ask you if you may, or maybe you can conclude that everything or all of these aspects can have an impact on the psychology on the children, because I think that the way that you explain about the differences between the United States schools and here in Mexico, there are so many changes for the children. So can you tell us a bit of that?
Yes, and I will propose to you the psychological implications vary. They are different depending on the student. So I met several children for whom this kind of transition was very traumatic. It was very difficult. And clearly they suffered. And I'll give you an example of that. And then I want to tell a more optimistic example afterwards. So I remember a child that we actually describe in Revista magazine. So magazine. which was published by the David Rockefeller Center at Harvard University. But we describe a student who was born in Mexico, moves to Los Angeles after doing kinder in Mexico. And the school in Los Angeles that the child attends from grade 1 to 4 is a monolingual, only an English school. And so the child gets identified as an English learner. They get identified as behind. He gets identified as behind his peers, and he feels very self-conscious that he doesn't know English as well as the other students. And he feels vulnerable and shy because of that. At the end of 4th grade, his family moves to Mexico, and he hasn't gone to school in Spanish for 4 years. And so suddenly all of the kids are speaking Spanish at a more advanced level, he thinks, than he is capable of. So again, he feels nervous and behind, and most of his peers don't speak much English. If you asked who is more accomplished in terms of language, this child who has a good start in 2 languages may know more language than the peers in California or the peers in Mexico. But in both cases, this child feels vulnerable and feels like they don't know as much, and are worried and are nervous. And that those psychological dimensions, sort of going to school and being nervous, going to school and being unhappy, feels very real. And that's unfortunate. And we as teachers would want to think, how can we interrupt that? How can we make that child feel better, feel safer, feel more welcome, have more of their background knowledge recognized and counted? On the other hand, so that does happen, right? A second negative story, we often have had children who the events that have led to their return to Mexico are a kind of trauma. A relatively common is a parent divorce, and it's no longer viable for the child and the mother to stay in the United States. So the mother, now as a single parent, for example, moves back to Mexico, in part so that extended family, the mother's parents, the child's grandparents, are available to be nearby to help with the child rearing. Or sometimes even we have cases of the mother moves back to Mexico with the child, socializes the child to be cared for by the grandparents, and then the mother moves back to the United States to send money, to send remittances, right? But the child who has watched a parent marriage dissolve, that's not the school's fault, but that child may well have pain, may well have disappointment, may well have hurt that gets exacerbated, becomes worse, because then there's the dislocation of moving from one familiar environment to an unfamiliar one. And that child can be sad at school for reasons that have nothing to do with school, but that affects the child's school experience. Now, more optimistically, and we also saw this, sometimes the children who come back from the United States or come from the United States, their peers like, wow, what fashionable clothes you have, or you were in Los Angeles, what's the current, most exciting music, right? And so the US experience becomes a form of status, and it becomes something that peers are excited about, and it makes the student, well, this is the really cool student, right? So it's not accurate to say the psychological dimensions are always negative. They often are. But it's also the case that we chronicled examples of where the experience somewhere else was understood as an asset. It was welcomed. It was something that made a child cool. And so it's kind of interesting, because the story is always complicated.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I feel the same, that it depends a lot of the person and the student and the behavior of their family and a lot of culture. Yeah,
for
thank
sure.
you.
Sure, my pleasure. Anyone else?
Esther?
Oh, Marce wrote in the chat. In what way? Oh, okay. Maybe that's an answer. Go ahead.
Okay,
Esther?
thank you. Yes, my question is that what difference did you find between students that travel to Mexico and the opposite, the ones that travel to US? What is the difference in the integration of the students?
So the United States has long imagined itself as a country of immigrants. So when somebody moves to the United States from somewhere else, the US attitude, and I'm going to propose this as a limited and flawed attitude, but the US attitude has always been, your moving here is proof that the United States is terrific, that it's great, that it's wonderful, and the task is to help you stay in the United States forever. And in particular, so that you're successful at school, we need to teach you English, and a lot of English, and English very fast. So there is an infrastructure in the United States that welcomes arriving students, but welcomes them in a certain way. And often that infrastructure does not imagine that the child, instead of permanently relocating to the US, is going instead to be enduringly binational. So a child comes to the US, is taught English, there's a focus on English, but there's a neglect of Spanish. Well, if we know that a child is likely, and certainly the evidence we have is some of these children who go to the US are going to return to Mexico. If we strip away the skill in Spanish in the United States because the United States doesn't think that's important, we are disabling the students' return or a subsequent move to Mexico, right? Where I have yet to encounter a United States school that says, we are actively trying to make it harder for a child to move to Mexico or move back to Mexico. But in practice, it's nonetheless the case that there is very little activity by US schools that make it more likely that transition to Mexico will be successful. So that US attitude of we have to teach English, we have to teach English, we will have special classes, English as a second language, English to speakers of other languages, depending on what part of the country. Sometimes it's called ELL classes, sometimes it's ELL for English language learner, sometimes EL for English learner, sometimes ESOL, English for speakers of other languages, sometimes ESL, English for a second language. In all of those cases, it's describing a same process where it's special programming for newly arriving children with the intent of accelerating, expediting, making very fast the transition to the United States. When a child moves to Mexico, it's more of a surprise. Mexico has thought of itself as an immigrant producing country, much more than an immigration country. And one of the things that to me is fascinating, and I'm not looking at the statistic in front of me, but in 2016, something like 1.5 million people living in Mexico had been born somewhere else. So that's only about 1% of Mexico's total population. But the average age of the population living in Mexico of people who had been born somewhere else was 15. So that means so much of the story isn't people moving as adults, people working in international commerce temporarily in Mexico. So much of the story is Mexico-born parents having children in the US, the parents moving back to Mexico, the child moving to Mexico for the first time, and that gets recorded as, you know, in Mexico statistics, INEGI statistics, that gets recorded as immigration. But Mexican schools have never thought that the task is to help a child who is strong in English learn Spanish as a second language. There is a history of bilingual education in Mexico, but it's, you know, Purépecha in Spanish, it's Nahuatl in Spanish. It's not English in Spanish, except in elite private schools. And then you have parents who are very cosmopolitan, and then part of why they're paying a tuition to a private school is their children will be international travelers as well. And that's English as a world language, not English as a heritage language of a child who's moving from the US, if that makes sense. So that's a piece of the difference, Esther. Of course, there are others, but that's part of it. One other thing I should say, a difference that Mexican teachers have noted to me over and over, when I mention things like school district, or I mention that school in the United States in Massachusetts is different than school where I live now in Nebraska. And in Nebraska, it is different than in Texas. And in Texas, it is different than in Florida or Washington State. And in Mexico, well, what do you mean it's different? Because in Mexico, the curriculum is created at the federal level. It's the Secretaría de Educación Pública. Yeah. If it's, the third Tuesday in September, and you go into, cuarto grado de primaria, all of the children are supposed to be studying the same thing. That doesn't happen in the United States because the history of management of schooling in the United States has historically been much more local. So where I live, the city of Lincoln, Nebraska has a different curriculum than 80 kilometers away, the city of Omaha, Nebraska, because there's a Lincoln school district and a Lincoln school board that officially picks the curriculum. And in Omaha, there also is a school board, but it's different. Now, in the case I'm describing there, Lincoln and Omaha both are supposed to observe Nebraska state standards because it's part of the same state, but those will be different than Kansas standards or Iowa standards or Oklahoma standards. So it's kind of a crazy. And so when a child comes from the US to Mexico, an additional question is, well, where in the US? Because the US experience is different depending on what part of the country they're coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think maybe one or two questions like to enter the chat. Lourdes?
Okay.
Okay, good morning. I have a doubt, and I have seen a child who knows English better than the teacher, and he made his assistant, as you say, and it was my first time seeing that situation. So what activities do you suggest to include the child in the group, and how to teach them more in a different way that they develop the English to interact with their classmate?
So in English is an easy example to pay attention to. The degree of competence one has in a language to teach it is higher than to learn with it. So you may know the word epistemology. It's the dimension of philosophy that refers to the study of the nature of knowledge. So if we say, what does it mean to know, right? A class in secundaria in Mexico introducing English, right? You will have some students who are practicing I am, you are, he is, she is, it is, right? And they're learning the language at the very rudimentary level, right? And so we would say that the nature of their knowing is beginner, it's early, right? And a child in that class who knows English, who gets asked by the teacher to be an assistant, the sophistication of trying to explain sort of why is it that in English you add an S to the end of a verb when it's third person singular. To give an example, he starts, right? Empezar, start. He starts. There's an S sound at the end when it's third person singular. And when we add an S to a noun in English, volunteers, right? Voluntarios, volunteers, plural. Then we get to the verb, volunteers start, right? So the S disappears from the verb, seems to show up in the noun when it's a plural subject and therefore a plural verb. And when it's a singular subject and a single verb, the S seems to move. For a child to be able to explain why that's correct, is a very, very complicated linguistic maneuver, right? So if you were to ask the question, is the child who is helping with English in that class learning more English? Yes, because suddenly they have to explain things that their beginner student classmates are trying to figure out. And so inside the same classroom, very different levels of learning, very different levels of sophistication are happening at the same time. Does that example make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I hope I answered enough of the question. Okay, Carmen giving me a thumbs up, yay. and I got a hand as well, thank you. Any last question?
I think there's a last question in the chat from Marce. In what way are similar Harvard and UNAM?
So UNAM and Harvard both propose to be comprehensive universities. So they propose to be, you can be interested in almost anything, and the university says, we have the capability to enhance or add more to your understanding, right? So if you are interested in anthropology, go to Harvard, go to UNAM. In both cases, the university can teach you anthropology. If you are interested in law, go to Harvard, go to UNAM. In both cases, they can teach you more about the law. If you are interested in government, go to the subject government, the study of government. Go to Harvard, go to UNAM, and you can learn political science, you can learn leadership practices and so forth, right? So I am saying they are similar in that what they propose to do as institutions, both propose to be comprehensive universities. Harvard offers la licenciatura, bachelor's degrees in English. Harvard offers master's degrees, la maestría. Harvard offers doctoral degrees, doctorados, right? UNAM, it's licenciatura, maestría, doctorado, right? UNAM, the question asks in what way are they the same? UNAM, there are, I think, right, institutions called Prepa UNAM. So you have the bachillerato, the high schools that sort of feed in, and part of that, that's Mexico education history, right? So in the 1917 Constitution, Mexico promised all of its citizens had a right to go to school, and Mexico builds out. There were primary and more advanced schools in Mexico before 1917. But in 1917, for the first time, the promise is made to everybody, you have a right to go to school. But as recently as 1991, that right was understood as lasting only through primaria. And then in 1991, Mexico said, secundaria is also obligatory, and we will make sure that we have the capacity to do secundaria as well for every child in the country, right? And that meant, a lot of parents were interested in their children having high school or preparatoria, right? But it meant that until, even after the change in 1991, the availability of that high school was going to be not through educación básica, but instead through tertiary education, through higher education. And now in 2012, Mexico decided that preparatoria is also supposed to be obligatory. In 2012, something like 60% of the age eligible population in Mexico already was going to high school. But in 2012, they said everybody's supposed to go, right? And they realized that a change as big as that wasn't going to occur in 1 year. So they said, well, everybody needs to go. That was a 2012 law by 2022. So Mexico was given 10 years to sort of develop the infrastructure. But I think in the meantime, it remains the case that educación básica only has a jurisdiction in kinder, primaria, and secundaria, and it's a different system that does, prepa, right? So UNAM has a prepa in a way that Harvard doesn't. That would be a way that it's different. These sort of feeder campuses. There are, in the US, there are a number of private schools that like to think Harvard is a very good university, UNAM is a very good university. But Harvard is officially private. It's more akin to IPN, right? The Instituto Politécnica Nacional. That's a private institution, correct? I think so. No, it's public also?
IPN is public.
Okay, so what is the one there is a, maybe it's Colegio de Mexico. There's a very prestigious private university in Mexico City.
Yeah, also the Tec de Monterrey and the Ibero.
Tec de Monterrey is across the country, yeah. In Iberoamericana, that was another one that is also private. So UNAM proposes to be public and has a responsibility to the country that Harvard likes to think it's helpful to the United States, likes to think that it's helpful to the world, but it is so by choice rather than by organization.
I think Ted is frozen, or can
sort of clarifies the distinction I was trying to make. But the reason I brought up Harvard and UNAM to start with is Harvard teaches teachers. UNAM doesn't. That is reserved in Mexico City for the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional. And I don't know how many escuelas normales there are in the zona metropolitana, but I would guess 80, maybe even 100 across Mexico City. Anybody know that number? ¿Cuántas escuelas normales hay en el Valle de México? Y tampoco no sé cuántas unidades de UPN están allá. Yo sé que el UPN original, lo más grande, está en la zona metropolitana, en CDMX. Pero cuántos más no sé. I know that UPN has something like 105 campuses across the country, and then a number of those, like UPN Tijuana, Unidad 022, has sub-campuses in Ensenada and in Tecate. So the Tecate and Ensenada feed to Tijuana, and then Tijuana connects to Mexico City. And then there's a separate UPN in Mexicali that is not connected to Tijuana. But anyway, so that's different countries have the challenge of how do we prepare teachers, and they've created different infrastructures for that. Any last comments or questions? I've very much enjoyed this. I hope you find it interesting. One of the funny things is many more of my presentations about this are in Spanish rather than English. So this is actually a topic area where I'm almost more accustomed to talking about it in Spanish than English, although my English is substantially more advanced than my Spanish. So it's been kind of fun and funny for me. It's felt strange to do all of this in English. So.
Ok, bueno, pues muchísimas gracias, Ted. Muchas gracias a todos los alumnos por haber asistido. Sin duda yo creo que fue una charla muy enriquecedora y pues sin duda se va conectando con muchos de los temas que hemos visto en las otras charlas y en las clases con Evan. Te agradecemos mucho a nombre de todo el equipo de UNAM-Boston, Ted, y también pues agradecemos mucho a todos los alumnos por haber asistido. Muchísimas gracias.
Ha estado un placer, un gran agradecimiento a ustedes.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Gracias.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.